The story of a billionaire who was shocked to find out a waitress was sleeping in her car with her baby, and just 3 hours later he bought her a new house. Drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. The hum of the city was a distant, irrelevant drone far below the 40th floor boardroom of Vance Global. Inside, the only sound was the slick, confident voice of Adrian Vance as he outlined the final, brutal details of a corporate takeover. His words were sharp, precise, and devoid of emotion, each one a perfectly polished weapon designed to dismantle a competitor. He stood before a panoramic window that framed the sprawling metropolis like a personal kingdom, his reflection a tall, imposing silhouette in a suit that cost more than most people's cars. His eyes, the color of a stormy sea, were fixed not on the city, but on the projected figures on the screen. To Adrian, the world was a balance sheet, and he was always in the black. "The final acquisition price is non-negotiable," he stated, his voice echoing slightly in the sterile, minimalist space. "We absorb their assets, liquidate their redundant departments, and consolidate their market share by quarter's end. Any questions?" Silence. The board members, a collection of seasoned executives who had seen empires rise and fall, merely nodded. They knew better than to question Adrian Vance when he was in this state. A state of predatory focus that had tripled the company's value since he inherited it from his formidable father. He was the king of this glass and steel jungle, and his reign was absolute. He was powerful, respected, and profoundly, achingly empty. The meeting concluded. As his team filed out, murmuring congratulations, Adrian remained at the window, his gaze finally dropping to the streets below. The people there were like ants, their lives a chaotic, messy scrawl that he had long since risen above. His phone buzzed, a summons from his sister, Victoria, likely about the upcoming Vance Foundation Gala. He ignored it. Another buzz, his fiancée, Isabel, probably confirming their dinner reservations at a restaurant where the water itself was a status symbol. He ignored that too. All of it felt like background noise, the tedious machinery of a life he had constructed but did not truly inhabit. Deciding to forego his driver for the suffocating journey back to his penthouse, Adrian descended to the garage. The sleek, silver beast of his custom sports car purred to life with a touch. He needed speed, a physical sensation to cut through the numb haze of his success. He drove out into the city, the engine a low growl weaving through the congested arteries of downtown. He was heading nowhere in particular, just away. Away from the phone calls, the expectations, the crushing weight of his own name. It was on a forgotten side street, miles from the gleaming towers of the financial district, that the world decided to remind him it was not, in fact, a balance sheet. The car, a marvel of German engineering that had never failed him, sputtered. It coughed once, twice, and then died with a pathetic sigh, rolling to a silent stop by the curb. Adrian stared at the dashboard in disbelief. The intricate systems were dark. For the first time in his life, he was stranded. He sat for a moment in stunned silence, the sudden quiet an affront. Outside, the world was no longer a distant abstraction. It was loud, gritty, and real. The neighborhood was a patchwork of faded brick buildings and small, struggling storefronts. Across the street, the neon sign of a diner flickered, casting a lonely, buzzing glow onto the damp pavement. "Rosie's Diner," it read. "Open 24 hours. With a sigh of profound irritation, Adrian got out of the car. He would call for a retrieval team, but his phone, he now realized, was still on his desk in the boardroom. Of course. He ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, feeling a rare flicker of helplessness. He needed to use a phone. His expensive suit felt like a costume here, his polished leather shoes absurd on the cracked sidewalk. He crossed the street and pushed open the diner door, a small bell announcing his arrival with a cheerful, tinny jingle. The inside was a time capsule. Red vinyl booths, a long formica countertop worn smooth by countless elbows, and the lingering smell of coffee and fried bacon. A handful of patrons were scattered about, their faces etched with the quiet weariness of the late afternoon. Behind the counter, a young woman was wiping it down with a cloth. She looked up as he entered, her expression tired but her smile genuine. "Table for one?" she asked, her voice soft. "I just need to use a phone," Adrian said, his tone clipped and impatient. "My car broke down." She nodded toward a payphone on the wall, a relic he hadn't seen in years. "It takes quarters." He reached into his pocket and came up empty. He never carried cash, let alone quarters. A wave of frustration washed over him. He was a man who could move markets with a single word, and he was defeated by a payphone. Look, he began, his patience fraying completely, I just need to make one call. It's important. Before the waitress could respond, a small voice piped up from a booth in the corner. Mommy, I dropped my blue crayon. Adrian's gaze was drawn to the source of the voice. A little boy, no older than 4 or 5, was sitting in a booth, a coloring book spread out before him. He had a mop of dark, unruly hair and was looking down at the floor with a concerned frown. Adrian found himself walking toward the booth, an instinct he couldn't explain pulling him forward. He bent down, his expensive suit creasing, and retrieved the crayon from under the table. Here you go, he said, his voice softer than he intended. The boy looked up to thank him, and Adrian froze. The child's eyes. They were his own. Not just the color, that same turbulent mix of gray and blue, but the shape, the intensity. It was like looking at a photograph of himself as a child. A cold shock, sharp and electric, jolted through him. His carefully controlled world tilted violently on its axis. The waitress, the boy's mother, had come over. Leo, what did I say about bothering people? She said gently before turning to Adrian. I'm so sorry, sir. Adrian couldn't speak. He just stared at the boy, Leo, whose name echoed in the sudden, roaring silence of his mind. The boy, seemingly unafraid, looked back at him with an unnerving sense of familiarity. He held up a small, silver object that had been hanging around his neck on a worn leather cord. It's my locket, the boy said proudly, his small voice cutting through Adrian's stupor. My mommy gave it to me. She said my daddy gave it to her. Adrian's blood ran cold. He knew that locket. He had bought it himself years ago from a small artisan shop in Italy. A silver heart intricately carved with a single, unique rose. He had given it to Elena, the only woman he had ever truly loved, the woman his family had forced him to leave. With trembling hands, he reached out. The boy, Leo, placed it in his palm. Adrian's thumb found the familiar, tiny clasp. He clicked it open. Inside were 2 miniature portraits. On one side was Elena, her smile as bright and painful as he remembered. On the other side was a picture of a younger Adrian, taken on the very day he had given her the locket. The diner seemed to disappear. The sounds of the city, the smell of coffee, the weary faces of the other patrons, it all faded into a deafening void. There was only the locket in his hand, the impossible truth it held, and the wide, questioning eyes of the boy who was his son. The boy he never knew existed. His phone, the merger, his entire life's work, it all became meaningless dust. He was a billionaire, a titan of industry, a king in a glass tower, and he knew in that one, heart-stopping instant that he was the poorest man on earth. His world had not just been shaken, it had been shattered completely, and the pieces were scattered all over the greasy floor of a 24-hour diner. He stumbled back from the booth, the locket still clutched in his fist. The waitress, Amelia, watched him with a mixture of confusion and alarm. Sir? Are you all right? Adrian couldn't form a response. The air was too thick to breathe. He turned, pushed past the door with its mocking little bell, and staggered out into the harsh reality of the street. He leaned against the cold brick wall of the diner, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. A son. He had a son. Elena had a son. His son. The words were a frantic, desperate loop in his mind. He squeezed his eyes shut, and Elena's face swam into his vision, not the smiling portrait in the locket, but her face on the day he had left her. Her tears, her pleas, her confusion. He had been 25, a rising star in his father's company, and his family had issued an ultimatum. End it with the unsuitable artist or be cut off entirely. Victoria, his sister, had been the most venomous, her words dripping with disdain for Elena's humble background. She's a distraction, Adrian. A liability. She will ruin everything our father built in his youthful arrogance and fear. He had chosen the empire. He had told Elena it was over, that they were from different worlds, and he had walked away without looking back, convincing himself it was a necessary sacrifice for a greater destiny. Now that destiny felt like a curse. He had spent the last 8 years building a monument to his own ambition, and it was all built on a foundation of lies. He had a son who was a stranger, a child living a life of hardship while he lived in obscene luxury. The guilt was a physical thing, a crushing weight on his chest. He pushed himself off the wall and began to walk, his directionless flight from earlier now replaced with a frantic, desperate need for answers. He found his way back to his penthouse, the doorman greeting him with a deference that now felt sickening. The apartment was cold and silent, a mausoleum of wealth. He went straight to his study and tore open a closet in the back, pulling out a dusty, forgotten box. Inside were the few things of Elena's he hadn't had the heart to throw away: dried flowers, a book of poetry she loved, a charcoal sketch she had made of him, and letters. A stack of letters he had never read, returned to him by the post office months after their breakup, marked address unknown. He had assumed she had simply moved on, vanished. He had been too cowardly to search for her. He sank into a chair, the unopened letters in his hand. Before he could bring himself to break the first seal, the door to his study swished open. It was Victoria, immaculate in a Chanel suit, her smile as polished and cold as the marble floors. "Adrian, there you are," she said, her tone a carefully constructed mix of sisterly concern and businesslike efficiency. "Isabel has been trying to reach you, and we need to finalize the guest list for the gala." The senator confirmed his attendance. Adrian looked at her, truly looked at her, for the first time in years. He saw past the perfect facade to the chilling ambition beneath. She had been the primary architect of his breakup with Elena. She had been the one to fill his head with poison about legacy and duty. "Did you know?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. Victoria arched a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "Know what, darling? That you've been ignoring your responsibilities all afternoon." Her eyes flickered to the box on his lap. A flash of something unreadable, annoyance? Fear crossed her face before being smoothed away. "Really, Adrian? Digging up relics from the past? It's not healthy. You have a bright future with Isabel. A suitable future." The word suitable struck him like a physical blow. That was the word she had used for Elena. Unsuitable. He stood up, the letters clutched in his hand. "Leave, Victoria." "Don't be ridiculous," she scoffed. "We have work to do." "I said leave," he repeated, his voice dropping to a raw whisper that held more menace than any shout. "Now." She stared at him, taken aback by the raw intensity in his eyes. For a moment, her composure cracked. She turned and walked out, her heels clicking in angry rhythm on the floor. The moment she was gone, Adrian strode to his desk and hit the secure line to his head of security, a man named Marcus Thorne. Marcus was ex-military, ruthlessly efficient, and the only person in his entire organization Adrian trusted implicitly. "Marcus," Adrian said, his voice tight. "I have a situation. It's personal, and it requires absolute discretion." "Of course, Mr. Vance," came the calm, professional reply. "I need you to find someone." Her name was Elena Flores. She was an artist. She would have been living in the city 8 years ago. "I need to know everything. Where she went, what happened to her." And he hesitated, the words catching in his throat. "I need you to find information on a woman named Amelia Hayes and her son, a boy named Leo, about 5 years old. They are connected to Elena. I want a full, comprehensive report. I don't care what it costs or what you have to do. I need it yesterday." "I'm on it," Marcus said, no questions asked. Adrian hung up. He felt a sliver of control returning, the familiar comfort of deploying his vast resources to solve a problem. But this wasn't a corporate merger. This was a life. 2 lives. 3 counting Elena's. He looked down at the letters in his hand, his fingers trembling. He couldn't bring himself to open them yet. He needed the facts first, the cold, hard data that Marcus would provide. He needed to build a fortress of information before he allowed the emotional floodgates to open. He spent the rest of the night pacing the length of his penthouse, the city lights twinkling below like a galaxy of indifferent stars. The luxury that had once defined him now felt like a prison. Every expensive object, every piece of modern art seemed to mock him, silent witnesses to the monumental failure of his life. It was just before dawn when the encrypted email arrived from Marcus. The subject line was a single, stark word, preliminary. Adrian's hands were shaking as he opened it. The report was brief, just the first threads of information Marcus had been able to pull in a few short hours. Subject, Elena Flores. Deceased. The 2 words hit him like a physical impact, knocking the air from his lungs. He sank into his chair, a wave of nausea and grief so profound it almost blacked out his vision. Deceased. The word was so final, so brutally absolute. All the faint, foolish hopes he hadn't even dared to acknowledge, that maybe he could find her, apologize, explain, turned to ash. He forced himself to read on. Cause of death. Complications from childbirth. Date of death. 5 years ago. The room began to spin. Childbirth. His son's birth. She had died giving life to their son. And he had been nowhere near her. He had been in a boardroom, probably celebrating some hollow victory. The report continued. Next of kin. None listed. Best friend. Amelia Hayes, present at the time of death. Amelia Hayes was granted guardianship of the infant Leo Flores per a notarized letter from the deceased. So the waitress, Amelia, wasn't just a random mother. She was a guardian. A woman who had taken on the burden of raising her best friend's child, his child, alone. The report ended with a final, chilling detail that Marcus had flagged as unusual. Hospital records indicate Ms. Flores was admitted under a variant of her name. Official cause of death was filed as a sudden infection with no mention of childbirth. The attending physician left the country shortly after. The details are murky. Further investigation is required. Murky. The word hung in the air. This wasn't just a tragedy. It was a cover-up. Someone had gone to great lengths to hide the birth of his son and the true cause of Elena's death. And as the cold, gray light of dawn broke over the city, Adrian Vance knew with a certainty that chilled him to the bone that this conspiracy led directly back to the one person who had the most to gain from Elena's disappearance. His own sister, Victoria. The investigation had just begun, but the battle lines were already being drawn. The preliminary report from Marcus was a lit match dropped into the gasoline of Adrian's guilt and anger. He couldn't sit in his penthouse and wait for more data. He needed to see them. He needed to be near the only piece of Elena that was left in the world. He drove his backup vehicle, a nondescript black sedan, back to the diner, parking a block away. He didn't know what he was going to do, what he could possibly say. He just needed to be there. He sat in his car for hours, watching the diner's entrance. He saw Amelia arrive for her shift, her face etched with a familiar exhaustion. He saw her smile at customers, refill coffee cups, and move with a weary grace that spoke of endless, thankless work. He felt a profound, burning shame. While he was closing billion-dollar deals, this woman was raising his son on tips. He knew he couldn't approach her as Adrian Vance, the billionaire whose family had ruined her best friend's life. He needed a way in, a way to enter their world without the crushing weight of his name. He needed to understand the life his son was living. So he got out of the car and walked, not to the diner, but around the neighborhood. It was a world away from his own. Small, cramped apartments stacked on top of each other, playgrounds with peeling paint, and the constant, grinding feeling of people just trying to get by. His search led him to a local community center that offered after-school programs. A flyer on the door advertised for volunteers. An idea, desperate and probably foolish, began to form in his mind. He walked inside, gave a false name, Adam Novak, and signed up to help with facility maintenance and after-school tutoring. It was a simple, humble act, so far removed from his real life that it felt almost like a disguise. For the next few days, Adrian lived a double life. By day, he was the ruthless CEO of Vance Global, fielding calls about the merger, deflecting Victoria's increasingly suspicious inquiries, and pressing Marcus for more information. By afternoon, he was Adam Novak, the quiet volunteer who swept floors and fixed leaky faucets at the community center. It was here, in this humble brick building, that he saw Leo again. Leo attended the after-school program while Amelia worked her long shifts at the diner. Adrian watched him from a distance at first, his heart a painful knot in his chest. He saw a boy who was bright, curious, and surprisingly resilient. He saw him share his snack with another child who had none, and he saw him meticulously building a tower of blocks with a focus that reminded Adrian of himself. He witnessed their hardship firsthand in small, devastating details. He saw the worn-out soles of Leo's shoes. He saw Amelia arrive to pick him up one evening, her face pale with exhaustion, holding a single grocery bag that looked barely enough for one meal, let alone two. He overheard her talking quietly on the phone to a landlord, her voice strained as she promised the rent would be on time. Every detail was a fresh stab of guilt. This was his son. This was the life his ignorance had condemned him to. Finally, he found the courage to approach. He was in the center's small yard, ostensibly fixing a broken swing set, when Leo came outside with a ball. The boy stopped and watched him, his head cocked to the side. "You're the man from the diner," Leo said, his voice clear and direct. Adrian's heart leaped into his throat. "I am," he managed to say, his voice thick. "My name is Adam. You have sad eyes," Leo observed with the unblinking honesty of a child. "Like my picture, Daddy." Adrian had to grip the chain of the swing to keep his composure. He knelt down to be on the boy's level. "Your picture, Daddy." Leo nodded, his dark hair falling into his eyes. "In my locket. Mommy says he was very brave but also very sad." Brave and sad. The words felt like a judgment from a life he had barely lived. He and Leo spent the next hour talking. It wasn't a grand, emotional conversation. They talked about dinosaurs and rocket ships and the best way to build a fort out of cushions. For the first time in nearly a decade, Adrian felt a genuine, uncomplicated flicker of joy. He was connecting with his son not as a billionaire or a CEO but as Adam, the man who knew how to tighten a bolt on a swing set. The bond was tentative, fragile, but it was real. The moment was shattered when Amelia arrived. She saw him kneeling with Leo and a guarded, suspicious look immediately crossed her face. "Leo, come on. It's time to go," she said, her voice tight. She grabbed Leo's hand, pulling him away. "I'd appreciate it if you didn't bother my son," she said to Adrian, her words polite but her tone like ice. "I wasn't," he started, but she was already walking away, her back rigid. He understood her fear. She was a single woman protecting her child from a stranger. But it still felt like a rejection, a barrier he didn't know how to cross. That night, the full scope of their struggle became devastatingly clear. Adrian had asked Marcus to discreetly track Amelia's movements, not to invade her privacy, but to ensure her safety, especially now that he suspected Victoria's involvement. Marcus's late-night call was grim. "Sir, you need to see this. Her apartment building, she was evicted 2 days ago. She hasn't been staying at the address on file." "What? Then where is she?" Adrian demanded, a cold dread creeping up his spine. "I've just located her," Marcus said, his voice heavy. "I'm sending you the location now. It's a parking lot behind a closed-down strip mall." Adrian didn't wait for another word. He was in his car in minutes, racing to the address Marcus had sent. He parked across the street, his headlights off, and what he saw broke something deep inside him. There, in the dim, flickering light of a single street lamp, was Amelia's old, battered car. And inside, she was carefully arranging a pile of blankets and coats in the back seat, creating a small, makeshift bed. She then gently lifted a sleeping Leo from the front seat and tucked him in, stroking his hair and whispering something Adrian couldn't hear. She pulled a thin blanket over herself in the driver's seat, laid her head against the window, and closed her eyes. They were living in their car. The sight was a physical blow. The shame he'd felt before was nothing compared to this. It was a searing, all-consuming fire of self-loathing. His son, his own flesh and blood, was sleeping in the back of a car in a deserted parking lot while he slept in a king-sized bed with silk sheets. The contrast was so grotesque, so obscene, that he felt sick. He watched for another minute, his hands clenched on the steering wheel, his vision blurred with tears of rage and regret. This was the reality of his choice 8 years ago. This was the consequence of his cowardice. He couldn't fix the past. He couldn't bring Elena back. But he could change this. He could change it right now. He picked up his secure phone and made a call, not to Marcus, but to his personal wealth manager. "Richard," he said, his voice raw with an urgency that startled the man on the other end. "I need you to do something for me. Right now. No questions." He gave a series of rapid-fire instructions. He described a neighborhood, a type of house, a list of requirements. It had to be safe. It had to be furnished. It had to be available immediately. "I don't care about the price," he finished, his voice cracking. "Buy it. Get the keys. Have a lawyer meet me with the paperwork in 2 hours. I want the deed in the name of Amelia Hayes." 3 hours later, just as the first hint of dawn was staining the sky, a bewildered but professional lawyer met Adrian in a quiet, all-night cafe. He handed over a file containing the deed and a set of keys. Adrian had purchased a small, charming 2-story house in a quiet, family-friendly suburb, fully furnished and with the utilities already transferred. He had paid for it in cash, a rounding error in his vast fortune, but an act that felt more significant than any deal he had ever made. He drove back to the desolate parking lot. Amelia was still asleep in the driver's seat, her face looking fragile and careworn in the morning light. He knew he couldn't be the one to give this to her. It had to be clean, anonymous, a lifeline from an unseen source. He placed the file and the keys in a large envelope and slipped it under the windshield wiper of her car. He retreated to his own vehicle and watched. An hour later, Amelia stirred. She sat up, her movements stiff, and her eyes fell on the envelope. She looked around, confused, before getting out of the car and cautiously taking it. She opened it, her brow furrowed in suspicion. She pulled out the deed, the legal documents, the single, shining key. Her face crumpled. She stared at the papers, her hands shaking so violently she had to brace herself against the hood of the car. She read the documents again and again as if she couldn't comprehend the words. Then she slid down to the ground, her back against the tire, and began to sob. They weren't tears of sadness, but of overwhelming, disbelieving relief. From across the street, Adrian Vance watched, his own tears falling freely. Buying the house was the easy part. It was a simple transaction. But as he watched the woman who had sacrificed everything for his son weep with gratitude for an anonymous act of kindness, he knew his journey was just beginning. He had given her a house, but he had to earn the right to call it a home. And that would be a debt he would spend the rest of his life repaying. The house was a lifeline, but it was also a mystery that deepened Amelia's mistrust. An anonymous benefactor of such magnitude felt less like a miracle and more like a threat. She moved in, of course, she had no choice. For Leo's sake, she accepted the incredible gift. But she was constantly on edge, watching over her shoulder, trying to understand who would do such a thing and why. Meanwhile, Adrian's world was closing in. Victoria, sensing his distraction and growing distance, became more aggressive. She started making comments about his slumming expeditions, her words laced with a condescending venom that confirmed Adrian's suspicions. She didn't know the full truth yet, but she knew he was digging into the past, and it terrified her. "I heard you've taken an interest in inner-city philanthropy," she said one afternoon, cornering him in his office. "It's a noble gesture, Adrian, but a bit off-brand for you. Leave the charity work to my foundation. You have a merger to close." "My interests are my own business, Victoria," Adrian replied coldly, not looking up from the file on his desk. It was Marcus's latest report, and the contents made his blood run cold. Marcus had unearthed a paper trail. A series of large, untraceable cash withdrawals from a Vance family trust account, one that Victoria exclusively controlled, made in the weeks following Elena's death. He had also located the nurse who had signed the falsified death certificate. The woman was living in a lavish apartment in another state, far beyond the means of a retired nurse. Marcus was already on a plane to persuade her to talk. The interference from Victoria escalated. Amelia was suddenly let go from her job at the diner. The owner, flustered and apologetic, could only say that he'd received a call from a very important person who made it clear that employing Amelia Hayes would be bad for his business. It was a classic Victoria move, subtle, untraceable, and devastatingly effective. Adrian was furious. This was a direct attack on Amelia, a clear warning shot. He immediately had his own people arrange for a deposit into Amelia's bank account, an anonymous severance package from her former employer, enough to sustain her for months. But it wasn't enough. Victoria was no longer just a ghost from the past, she was an active threat to his son's well-being. He knew he couldn't fight this battle alone. He needed an ally, someone on the inside of Amelia's world. He went to the community center, this time not as Adam the volunteer, but as Adrian Vance. He asked to speak with the center's director, a warm but no-nonsense woman named Sarah Jenkins. He laid out a carefully edited version of the truth. He explained that he was a friend of Leo's father who had passed away and that he had recently discovered the boy's existence. He told her he was the anonymous benefactor who had bought the house and that he was deeply concerned for Amelia and Leo's safety due to a complicated family issue. Sarah was skeptical at first, her eyes sharp and assessing. She was fiercely protective of the families she served. "Amelia is a good woman," she said, her arms crossed. "She's been through more than enough. The last thing she needs is some rich man playing games with her life." "This isn't a game," Adrian insisted. His voice filled with a raw sincerity that finally seemed to cut through her defenses. "The person threatening her is my own sister. She is powerful and she is ruthless. I'm trying to protect them, but Amelia doesn't trust me. She has every reason not to. I need your help. I need you to be a bridge. I need you to tell her that the danger is real, but so is my intention to help." He gave her Marcus's direct, secure number. "If anything seems wrong, if anyone suspicious comes around, you call this number. Day or night." His gamble paid off. Sarah, seeing the genuine fear and desperation in his eyes, agreed to help. She became his conduit to Amelia, subtly vouching for his character as Adam and reassuring Amelia that while his background was mysterious, his concern for Leo was genuine. The turning point came when Marcus sent his report from his meeting with the nurse. It was a signed, videotaped confession. The nurse, terrified of the consequences but more terrified of Marcus's quiet intensity, admitted everything. Victoria Vance had approached her at the hospital. She had paid her a fortune to alter the medical records to list the cause of death as an infection to erase any official mention of a live birth. But there was more. The nurse's confession contained a detail so monstrous it made Adrian feel physically ill. Victoria's original plan hadn't just been to cover up the birth. She had arranged for the baby, Leo, to be transferred to a notoriously corrupt international adoption agency, one known for trafficking children to wealthy, unscreened buyers. She wanted him gone, vanished from the face of the earth. The only thing that had stopped the plan was Amelia. She had refused to leave her dying friend's side. When Elena passed, Amelia, armed with the notarized letter of guardianship Elena had insisted on signing just days earlier, had physically barred the transport team from taking the baby. She had held the newborn Leo in her arms and refused to let him go, threatening to call the police and the media. Unwilling to risk a public scene, Victoria's agents had been forced to back down, reporting back that the situation was too complicated. Victoria, assuming the waitress and the baby would simply fade into the city's underbelly, had let it go, never imagining they would one day surface again. Amelia hadn't just been a friend. She had been a lioness. She had saved his son's life. The rage that filled Adrian was cold and absolute. This was beyond jealousy or protecting a legacy. This was attempted kidnapping, trafficking. This was pure evil, cloaked in designer suits and philanthropic endeavors. The stakes had been raised to an unbearable level. Victoria wasn't just trying to keep a secret. She was capable of eliminating the evidence. And the evidence was a 5-year-old boy. That night, a black car idled for over an hour on the quiet suburban street where Amelia and Leo now lived. Sarah, the community center director, noticed it from her own house down the block. Remembering Adrian's warning, she immediately called Marcus. Within 10 minutes, 2 of Marcus's security cars had boxed the vehicle in. The driver was a low-level private investigator who, under duress, admitted he had been hired by Victoria Vance's office to gather information on the new residents of the house. It was the final proof Adrian needed. Victoria knew where they were. The quiet war of attrition was over. The time for hiding in the shadows, for acting as an anonymous benefactor, was done. He had to draw the battle lines, and he had to do it now before Victoria's next move became something far more permanent. He had the evidence, he had the confession, and he had a righteous fury that had burned away the last vestiges of the cold, detached man he used to be. The confrontation was coming, and it would be swift and merciless. The next day, Adrian called Victoria. His voice was calm, almost unnervingly so. "I need to see you," he said. "In Father's study. 1 hour." The study in the Vance family mansion was a room preserved in amber, a shrine to his father's ruthless ambition. It was all dark wood, leather-bound books he knew his father had never read, and portraits of stern-faced ancestors. It was the room where ultimatums were delivered and family loyalty was enforced. It was the perfect stage for what was about to happen. Victoria arrived precisely on time, looking flawless and confident. "Adrian, this is a bit dramatic, don't you think?" she said with a light laugh, strolling toward the large mahogany desk. "If this is about the gala seating chart again, Sit down," Adrian commanded. His voice was quiet, but it cut through the air like a shard of glass, stopping her cold. She stared at him, her smile faltering. She saw the look in his eyes, a cold, hard fury she had never seen before, and for the first time she looked afraid. She sat, her posture stiff and wary. Adrian didn't sit. He stood over her, a towering figure of judgment. He tossed a single file onto the polished surface of the desk. It landed with a heavy, definitive thud. 8 years ago, he began, his voice a low, controlled tremor, "I ended a relationship with a woman named Elena Flores. I did it because you told me she was a liability. You told me she would ruin the family name." Victoria's face was a mask of practiced innocence. "Adrian, I was only thinking of you, of what was best for the company." "She was pregnant," Adrian said, the words dropping into the silent room like stones. "She was pregnant with my son." The mask on Victoria's face didn't just crack, it shattered. A flicker of pure, unadulterated panic flashed in her eyes before she could suppress it. "That's a ridiculous, baseless accusation," she stammered, her voice suddenly strained. "Is it?" Adrian leaned forward, placing his hands flat on the desk. "Because I have the hospital records, Victoria. The real ones. The ones that show she died from complications of childbirth. And I have a signed, videotaped confession from the nurse you paid to falsify her death certificate and make my son disappear." All the color drained from Victoria's face. She looked from Adrian's unforgiving eyes to the file on the desk as if it were a venomous snake. The poise, the arrogance, the years of carefully crafted superiority. It all dissolved in an instant, leaving behind only the raw, ugly truth of her desperation. "I did it for you," she finally shrieked, her voice ragged and shrill. "I did it for this family." She was nobody, A penniless artist who would have shackled you to a life of mediocrity. That child would have been a stain on the Vance legacy. I was protecting you. I was protecting everything Father built. Her justification, the twisted, selfish logic of it, was more damning than any confession. There was no remorse in her voice, only the righteous indignation of a criminal who believed her crimes were necessary. She truly believed she had done the right thing. Adrian felt a profound, bottomless disgust. You weren't protecting a legacy, he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper filled with a terrifying calm. You were protecting your own jealousy. You couldn't stand that Father chose me to succeed him. You couldn't stand that I had found something real, something outside of this gilded cage you love so much. So you destroyed it. You didn't just lie to me. You tried to steal my son. He stood up straight, his decision absolute. As of this moment, you are no longer a part of this family. You are no longer on the board of Vance Global. You are cut off from every trust, every account, every asset bearing the Vance name. You are no longer my sister. You are nothing to me. Victoria stared at him, her mouth agape, a torrent of fury and disbelief warring on her face. You can't do that. Father's will. I can, Adrian interrupted, his voice like flint. And I will. You have until the end of the day to clear out your office. After that, security will escort you from the premises. He turned his back on her, a final, complete dismissal. He walked out of the study without a backward glance, leaving her there amidst the ruins of her ambition. The first part of his war was won, but the most important part was yet to come. He drove directly to the small, sunlit house he had bought for Amelia. He knocked on the door, his heart pounding. When she opened it, her expression was guarded, but there was a flicker of recognition for Adam, the kind volunteer. Leo was behind her, peeking around her legs. Amelia, he said, his voice thick with emotion. My name is not Adam. My name is Adrian Vance. Her eyes widened, first in confusion, then in dawning, horrified recognition. She took a protective step back, pulling Leo behind her. The name Vance was a poison she knew all too well. It was the name of the family that had broken her best friend's heart. Please, Adrian said, holding up his hands in a gesture of peace. Please, just let me explain. I know everything. I know what you did for Elena. I know what you did for Leo. He spent the next hour sitting on the steps of her front porch because she wouldn't let him inside. He told her everything. He told her about his cowardice, about his family's pressure, about the lies he had been fed. He told her about Victoria's deception, about the falsified records, and about the monstrous plan to have Leo taken away. He confessed his ignorance, his shame, and his profound, unending gratitude for her sacrifice. He didn't make excuses or ask for forgiveness. He simply laid the entire, ugly truth at her feet. Amelia listened in stunned silence, her face pale, her arms wrapped tightly around a now quiet Leo. Tears streamed down her face as she heard the full extent of the danger she had saved him from, a danger she never even knew existed. When he was finished, the silence stretched between them, thick with 8 years of pain and secrets. My sister is going to try to discredit me, Adrian said finally, his voice raw. She's going to paint you as a gold digger and opportunist. She's going to use the full power of our name to destroy us both and hide what she did. The Vance Foundation Gala is in 2 days. It's her biggest night, a celebration of her public image. I'm going to use that stage to expose her, to tell the entire world the truth. But I can't do it alone. He looked at her, his soul bared. I am making you a promise, Amelia. I will protect you and I will protect our son. I will spend the rest of my life making amends for the time I have lost. I am asking you to trust me. Just this once. Amelia looked down at Leo, who was staring up at Adrian with wide, curious eyes. She looked at this man, this stranger who was a ghost from their past, and saw not the powerful billionaire but a father desperate to reclaim his son. She saw the truth of his pain in his eyes. After a long moment, she gave a single, slow nod. Their alliance was sealed. The final battle was about to begin. The night of the Vance Foundation Gala was a spectacle of power and wealth. The city's elite, from senators to socialites, streamed into the grand ballroom of a 5-star hotel, a sea of tuxedos and designer gowns. At the center of it all was Victoria Vance, radiating charm and benevolence. She was the gracious host, the celebrated philanthropist, about to receive the Humanitarian of the Year award. It was to be the crowning achievement of her public life, a perfect illusion she had spent years constructing. Adrian arrived late, slipping into the cavernous room unnoticed. He wasn't wearing a tuxedo, but a simple, dark suit. He looked like an undertaker at a wedding. He ignored the questioning glances and made his way to a predetermined spot near the stage, where Marcus was waiting, looking just as grimly determined. In a private suite upstairs, Amelia was watching the event on a monitor, her hand resting on Leo's sleeping head. Sarah, the community center director, sat with her, a steady, reassuring presence. Amelia's heart was pounding. She had put her faith in Adrian, a man she barely knew, a man whose name was synonymous with her deepest pain. Now all she could do was watch and pray. The moment came. After a series of fawning speeches, the master of ceremonies invited Victoria to the stage to accept her award. The room erupted in applause. Victoria glided to the podium, a vision of elegance and grace, her smile brilliant under the spotlights. "Thank you," she began, her voice smooth and practiced. "To be recognized for this work, for upholding the Vance family's commitment to community and integrity, is the greatest honor of my life. Our legacy is not built on wealth but on a foundation of lies." The voice, amplified by a secondary microphone, cut through the ballroom like a blade. A stunned silence fell over the crowd. Every head turned. Adrian Vance was walking onto the stage, his face a mask of cold fury. Victoria froze, her smile plastered on her face, her eyes wide with terror. "Adrian," she hissed through her teeth. "What are you doing? Get off the stage." "I don't think so," Adrian said, his voice ringing with absolute authority. He turned to the shocked audience. "My sister speaks of legacy and integrity. I'm here tonight to tell you the true story of the Vance family legacy." On the two enormous screens flanking the stage, which had been showing a montage of Victoria's charitable acts, the image suddenly switched. It was now a high-resolution scan of a bank statement showing a massive cash transfer from Victoria's trust to an offshore account. "This is the first payment my sister made to a hospital nurse," Adrian announced, his voice booming through the silent hall. "A payment to falsify a death certificate and cover up the birth of my son." Gasps rippled through the audience. Victoria was ashen, clutching the podium for support. "He's lying," she shrieked. "My brother is unwell. This is a corporate dispute, nothing more." The image on the screen changed again. Now it was the videotaped confession of the nurse, her face clear, her voice trembling as she detailed the entire conspiracy. The audio was piped through the ballroom's sound system, every word of Victoria's monstrous plot laid bare for the world to hear. The story of Elena, of the cover-up, of the attempt to have an innocent baby trafficked overseas. The crowd was in an uproar. The polished facade of the city's elite had cracked, revealing a raw, hungry appetite for scandal. Reporters were scrambling, their cameras flashing, broadcasting the entire, shocking spectacle live to the world. "She did all of this to protect a legacy," Adrian continued, his voice thick with contempt, "a legacy she believed would be tainted by a woman she deemed unsuitable and by the existence of my child. But my real legacy isn't in a boardroom or on a balance sheet. He's a 5-year-old boy. His name is Leo." As if on cue, the final, most damning piece of evidence appeared. It was a photograph. A recent one. It showed Leo, smiling brightly, standing beside Amelia. And in the photo, Leo was holding up the silver locket. "The woman standing beside him is Amelia Hayes," Adrian said, his voice softening for the first time. "She was my son's mother's best friend. When my sister's henchman came to take my newborn son away, she saved his life. For 5 years, she has raised him as her own, protected him, and loved him, often with nothing to her name. That is integrity. That is honor. That is a legacy." Victoria stared at the screen, at the face of the child she had tried to erase, and something inside her finally broke. She let out a guttural sob, a sound of pure, animalistic despair. Her perfect world had been utterly and publicly obliterated. At that moment, 2 uniformed police officers and a plainclothed detective, alerted by Marcus, made their way through the stunned crowd and onto the stage. They approached Victoria, their movements calm and professional. "Victoria Vance," the detective said quietly but clearly, "you are under arrest on suspicion of conspiracy, fraud, and attempted child trafficking." The entire ballroom watched in stunned, breathless silence as the humanitarian of the year was led off the stage in handcuffs, her face streaked with tears, her carefully constructed life in ruins. In the ensuing chaos, Adrian scanned the room. His gaze landed on the main entrance. Amelia was standing there, holding a now-awake Leo's hand. She had come down from the suite. Their eyes met across the tumultuous space. He descended the stage, the crowd parting before him as if he were royalty. He walked directly to Amelia and Leo, oblivious to the flashing cameras, and shouted questions. He knelt down in front of his son. "Hi, Leo," he said softly. Leo looked at his mother, who gave him a small, reassuring smile. Then he looked back at Adrian. "You're not Adam," he said. "You're my picture daddy." Yes, Adrian said, his voice breaking, tears finally streaming down his face. I am. He didn't ask for a hug. He just opened his arms. After a tiny hesitation, Leo stepped forward and wrapped his small arms around Adrian's neck. Adrian held his son for the first time, a wave of love so powerful, so profound, it felt like coming home after a lifetime of being lost. He stood up, pulling both Leo and Amelia into his embrace. The cameras flashed, capturing the moment not of a billionaire's triumph, but of a family's birth. Publicly, finally, they were united, a testament to a love that had survived betrayal and a truth that had, at last, come into the light. 6 months later, the autumn sun cast long shadows across a quiet park. The sound of a child's laughter pealed through the air. Adrian Vance, dressed not in a suit but in jeans and a simple sweater, pushed a swing higher and higher. On the swing was Leo, his face alight with pure joy, his dark hair flying in the wind. Adrian was no longer the king of a glass tower, he was simply a father, present and accounted for. Amelia sat on a nearby bench, a soft smile on her face as she watched them. The house Adrian had bought for them was now a true home, filled with warmth, crayon drawings taped to the refrigerator, and the easy comfort of a family finding its rhythm. The turmoil of the past felt like a distant storm. Victoria had been convicted, her name now a synonym for disgrace. The Vance Global merger had been called off. Adrian had stunned the corporate world by stepping down as CEO, retaining his ownership but handing the day-to-day operations to a trusted successor. He had found a new purpose. His immense resources were now funneled into his new project, the Elena and Amelia Foundation, a massive nonprofit dedicated to providing housing, legal aid, and support for single parents and at-risk children. It was his penance and his passion, an act of redemption that was healing him one family at a time. He was a changed man, the cold emptiness inside him replaced by a profound and steady sense of peace. Adrian slowed the swing and walked over to the bench, sitting down beside Amelia. Leo ran off to chase a flurry of pigeons, his energy boundless. He's happy, Amelia said quietly, stating a simple, beautiful fact. We all are, Adrian replied, his eyes full of a warmth she had once thought impossible. He reached into his pocket, but he didn't pull out a velvet box with a giant diamond. Instead, he brought out the silver locket. It had been professionally cleaned and polished, and the old leather cord was replaced with a sturdy silver chain. I wanted you to have this, he said, placing it in her hand. It belonged to Elena and it led me to you. It led me home. Amelia opened it. On one side was still the smiling portrait of her best friend, Elena. But on the other, the old picture of Adrian was gone. In its place was a new, tiny photograph, taken just last week. It was a picture of the three of them, Adrian, Amelia, and Leo, laughing together in this very park. Tears welled in her eyes. It's beautiful, Adrian. You are the most honorable, selfless person I have ever known. Amelia Hayes, he said, his voice thick with emotion. You saved my son. You saved me. I know I have no right to ask for anything more, but I have to. Will you build a future with me? Will you be my family, officially? It wasn't a grand proposal, but a quiet, heartfelt plea. Amelia looked from the locket to his earnest, hopeful face, and her answer was in her smile before she even spoke the word. Yes. He slipped the locket around her neck, his hands gentle. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching their son play. Adrian thought of the empire he once prized, the buildings that scraped the sky, the wealth that could move mountains. It was all meaningless noise compared to this. His true legacy wasn't forged in steel or written on a stock ticker. It was here, in the warmth of the autumn sun, in the promise of a shared future, and in the small, joyful hand of the son he was finally blessed to call his own.